Happy Friday, Pacer Nation. Welcome back to another episode here of your go-to Pacers podcast, setting the pace. And today, Facci and me are going to be talking about one player and one player alone, the man that threw down a between-the-legs dunk on the road in the Garden in the playoffs. It is ain't no stopping Mr. Obi Toppin. Facci, how we doing?
I'm doing great, man. Obi Toppin, that was someone that for years it felt like I was saying we gotta make a move for Obi. We gotta make a move. And I think that we learned a lot about Obi Toppin this year. I think some was good, some was, maybe our imagination imagined a little bit more. But overall, this was someone that fit what this team was looking to do. And I think overall a lot of people could be happy with the season we saw from Obi Toppin.
Oh, for sure. And I think that with Obi Toppin, this is a player that I think you were definitely higher on than I was coming into the season. I was a little bit skeptical of what his role would be. I think it eventually kind of played out to what I expected his role to be in the league. I didn't envision him as a starting power forward in the league. Maybe he could become that still, but I think we've seen through his young career that maybe he's more of a bench level of player that can bring that spark when you need him to. But with Jarris Walker getting drafted, I was very excited to see what Jarris could do in those moments. Jarris doesn't really see the floor. Indiana actually pulls Obi Toppin out of the starting five because their defense was getting abused so much, and they replaced him for Jalen Stick Smith. So now Obi Toppin is relegated to the bench, comes back in, I think, and starts maybe one or two games when Sticks ended up having an injury. But they make the decision to make that trade for Pascal Siakam to solidify that starting power forward spot that, permanently put Obi Toppin as the team's backup four and their hybrid five. So when looking at Obi Toppin, definitely fits the system, but I think that Indiana realized early on not the long term answer at the starting position.
I think we all realize that. I think when, for so long, if you just looked at the minimal amount of starts that Obi had or the times that he played 30 minutes or more as a Nick, he always produced. So it led you to believe that this is a guy that could be maybe a fringe all-star. Like, who knows? Unleash him, see what could happen. And we saw early on he's better than a guy that's not getting off the bench for the Knicks, but he's not quite starting caliber four in this league. He is probably perfectly good in the role that Indiana had him in, coming off the bench, being one of their top bench scorers on the season. And I think he's a big part of league's best bench. So if we were, to do it all over again, obviously no one's going to debate saying, hey, do we bring in Pascal Siakam or do we stick with Obi Toppin? No. But I think that even Obi understands, hey, I could probably be a really good six man in this league. And I'm sure on some teams he could start, but I think that Indiana had him in the perfect role. And I think that both sides were happy last year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he definitely fit where this team needed him the most. Now, Bachi, I want to get into some of his shooting percentages and numbers last year because last year he shot the ball incredibly well. And I think I've brought this up a few different times, but it was Matt Moore on Twitter just said, wait, Obi Toppin shot 40% from three at the end of the season. And it just makes me laugh that people were just so stunned by that because it's not who Obi Toppin is, but his shooting is what made him so spectacular for the Pacers last year. It wasn't just the cool lobs and the dunks and the getting out in fast break transition, things like that. It was, hey, this dude is actually making a lot of 3-point shots, which is really fitting in well to our system. So talk to me a little bit about some of the stats you came up with for Obi Toppin.
So yeah, career year by a landslide, no doubt about it. 10.3 points per game on 57% shooting from the field, the 40% from three that you mentioned. And he averaged about 4 rebounds per game, about half a block. So I felt like the 3-point shooting, it was real. It was close to about 4 attempts per game. About another, shot 40% from the corners. I think that was great for this offense. I just think that Obi was someone that in the beginning of the year you were like, I don't know, I'm skeptical. Could he be a 3-point shooter? At the end of the year, I had full trust in Obi from three, so I felt really good about that. So those were some of his, and the leap from 3-point shooting is, his previous best season from three was 34%. That is below league average. So for him to go from 34% to 40%, that's a big jump. And then actually to break it down even further, he shot 70% on twos last year and
Mm.
80% in the paint. I just felt that Obi was someone that was never reckless from the field. He didn't have those games where he was like 4 or 14 or anything of that sort.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting stats here from Obi Toppin. If you're looking at NBA.com, I will say this. He shot 42.3% on 6+ feet of wide open space from three, 39.6 on 4 to 6 feet. But when he was within 2 to 4 feet being guarded, 9.1% from three. So
Well,
if you had any airtight space on him, he couldn't lift over you and shoot. He's got to be wide open. Now, interestingly enough, with zero dribbles and catch and shoot form, 40.2% from three. With just one dribble, 42.1. But ironically, Facci, with 3 to 6 dribbles, 66.7% from three. He was unreal. But what I think is really interesting too is looking at where they come at in the shot clock, because sometimes you can see guys take early shots, you can see them take late shots, you can see them taking in the flow. At the end of the shot clock, when the pressure's on them to make it, just 22.7%. 7 to 4 left in the shot clock, which is a decent number, you
yeah.
know, 37.9%. But
No,
here's where he shot his best with 15 to 7 seconds left on the shot clock, 48.3% from the
she
field from the 3-point line. So it just kind of shows you what he can do. And if you're looking at 3-point field goal attempts also on catch and shoot versus pull-ups, he shot a better percentage from the pull-up 3-point shot than he did the catch and shoot 3-point shot this season. 41.7% on pull-up threes and 40.9% from catch and shoot. So really, now frequency for the pull-ups was significantly less because he took 39.4% of his shots from catch and shoot, just 6.4 on pull-ups. But I think that showing that he was still able to knock down pull-up threes and catch and shoot threes at such a high clip, his shot just really came into form this year, and I think that was the biggest aspect of his game.
I mean, some of those, stats are, jaw dropping. I mean, those are really, really good percentages, and I think that that's something that nobody expected. But also, like, this was like that big come out year for him, where it's like
Mhm.
his playing time was so inconsistent in New York. So for him to be able to play consistently and put together the year that he had, it feels like he knows exactly what to work on this offseason and where that. Hey, if he is to come back to the Pacers playing this style of offense, I truly do feel that last season wasn't a fluke. I think that he can get better from what we saw last year. I think that he can raise his game up a little bit more, and I think that that's something that when you're talking about being able to play, I thought his best ability was availability. He played in 100 games last year. That's something that Chad said. He received an award for the Pacers because that's just really impressive. I remember when he had that ankle injury against the Hawks, and it looked like, oh my God, don't tell me Obi's going to miss some of the playoffs now. He never missed any time at all. And I think that that's something that's very, very rare in the NBA. It's almost crazy how it felt like we were almost pulling our hair out to say, how are we going to get Tyrese to 65 games? Meanwhile, Obi played 100.
Mhm. Obi was so good last year at staying healthy, and it did kind of play a factor into Jarris Walker maybe getting some minutes here and there because he never really had to worry about Obi going down. And Obi played through injury too. Like the game against the Hawks at the end of the season, Obi Toppin had hurt his ankle, I think, against the Cavaliers. That previous game of the Pacers needed to win to avoid the play-in tournament. And Obi Toppin plays. Pacers spank the Hawks by like 30 plus points. And Obi Toppin had some great alley oops in that game too. So it was like he was able to still do stuff despite having an injury. So Obi Toppin to me, I think that he exceeded everybody's realistic expectations for him. I
Some
don't
were
think
unrealistic.
what was
I
that?
mean, some of those expectations, I know I was putting some pressure on him. People before the year, if you remember, were like, he's going to make an all-star game. A lot of people thought he's going to win most improved. Like those were some of the hot takes coming into last year. I thought that he would be someone that maybe could put up like 15 points per game, something of the sort. While he didn't quite get to that level, he did have a really good year, but some expectations were all over the place.
I honestly cannot tell you what I thought his numbers were going to be from last year. I'm sure if we go back and listen to some of the podcasts we did, I probably had some decent numbers for him. I think the most improved case is not out of this world crazy because the guy's starting and he pops off well. Like, hey, Jalen Johnson did that for the Hawks, right? Once they traded John Collins, like he was really kind of able to break free and become that player. I mean, it all just kind of depends on who you are as a player and what your game is and who you're playing with and things like that. But overall, I'm just gonna say the all-star stuff, that's a bit over the top dramatic, and that's definitely rose-colored glasses on, not saying things correctly. But if you thought he had a chance to be most improved, I'm not gonna knock you for that. I think that that's fair because most improved is very subject, right? You can say, whatever, but who even won most improved this year? Do you remember?
Um, was it? No, never mind. Now it's Reed 1-6, man. I don't remember
Was it
who
Anthony
even.
Edwards?
It might have honestly been Anthony Edwards, and I think that sometimes that's not fair because you're talking about the number one overall pick who's already an all star.
Oh, Tyrese
And
Maxey. Tyrese Maxey.
okay, Tyrese Maxey definitely did have a really good year, but he was also pretty good to begin with. So it just shows that there's not a lot of love out there for like the Obi Toppin type players that did have a much better year than before because he definitely did improve drastically, but I don't think anybody even remotely had Obi Toppin in their top five voting.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the playoffs now, Facci, where Obi Toppin really took his game to another level in different moments. Obviously, had some ups and downs, but that is what happens throughout a series and when you are a role player. But let's talk about the good and the bad we saw from Obi Toppin in the playoffs. What you got for us?
So in terms of the playoffs, he took his game to the next level. He averaged 11 points per game, which is a little bit more than what he averaged in the regular season. Still did it on 54% shooting when you're going up against, better teams. 3-point shooting took a little bit of a dip, 36%, but still above league average. And then his rebounding actually went up, 4.5 rebounds per game. So I thought that was good. He had quite a few games where he had about 8 rebounds or more for the Pacers. And then when you want to just talk about like some individual playoff games. He had four times in the playoffs he scored 15 or more. Twice he scored 20 or more, which really kind of leads me into when I think of like Obi in the playoffs, I think of the closeout game against
Yeah.
Milwaukee in Game 6, 21 points to lead the Pacers. Who would have thought that Obi Toppin would be leading you in points in a closeout first round series? So I think that something like that was huge. Also had a couple other games, 20 points in game 2 against the Knicks, 15 points in game 1 against Boston. But they won that game 2 against the Knicks. They should have won that game against Boston. I just felt overall he had some pretty big playoff games and was like a very consistent contributor to the Pacers when we didn't know what his role would be come playoff time.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go back and look at the sample size, it's probably harder to like say from like looking outward, and not being so close in and zoomed in on every single game. But like it felt like when Obi Toppin had a really good playoff game, the Pacers usually won that game. I think the anomaly probably was game one, the Knicks against the Knicks. Indiana's bench was really good that game. They lost that game 1 and game 2. But I will say, like the games he had against Milwaukee, the Obi Toppin chants that I heard in Gainbridge Fieldhouse were through the roof. And it's because he came in and provided such a spark offensively. And I know that he did it on the road a few different times, but he really did it at home mostly, is what I felt like. Against the Knicks, it was kind of like the first 4 games were like complete flipped of what it was against Milwaukee. But then games 5, 6, and 7 were kind of what you expected it to be like. I mean, game 7 was just crazy because Indiana hit everything, but like that wasn't even really Obi Toppin that was really doing all that. It was more so like the starters got really hot and then the bench came in and continued playing well. But Obi Toppin to me, I think he showed progress in this playoff run to the Eastern Conference Finals. I do think that when Miles Turner was hurt in game 4 against the Celtics, and they had to keep kind of subbing him in and out of the game when they were playing Obi Toppin at the small ball 5, he really did struggle against that Boston Celtics team, and they were really hunting him defensively. So we've seen some moments from him where he can be very good defensively, but I think at the end of the day, Obi Toppin is a mediocre at best defender. With his size and with his ability to jump and move laterally, things like that, I think that that is another element of his game he could improve upon and really kind of continue to grow as a defender and be more impactful than what he was last year. But you talked about it, the rebounding did improve. It was, hey, let's not leak out as much, and we're going to do this by design. I mean, I asked Rick Carlisle about that earlier in the season. I'm like, was it kind of by design to tell Obi to quit crashing, leaking out as much and crash the glass more? And typical Rick Carlisle response, he just said yes. Back to my question. So at least it was confirmation of what they asked him to do. But regardless, I mean, it was good to see Obi Toppin really flourish, not just in the regular season, but in the playoffs as well, because the Pacers needed somebody like that off the bench, especially with Mathurin being out. And we talked about like he could be the X factor for the Pacers in some of these playoff series. And I wouldn't say for the entirety of the playoff run he was the X factor, but I think if you want to say for specific games throughout the postseason run, he could have very well been the X factor for a lot of those games.
Yeah, I felt like, you mentioned before, is like Obi had really good first quarters. Like he would come into the game and score like 11 points in the first quarter and just make a big difference. And all of a sudden that gave the Pacers like a swing of momentum. So I think that was really huge. I mean, against the Bucks in that first round series, he averaged 12.3 points per game, 5.8 rebounds, shot 49% from the field. Like that's a really good series right there for Obi Toppin. I mean, those are better numbers than what he averaged in the regular season outside of the shooting percentages. And I think even against the Knicks, he averaged 10 points per game on 57% from the field. Like that's good. Against Boston, 10.5 points per game, 4.3 rebounds. Did it on about 59% from the field and about 50% from three. But it just felt that he was good, but obviously defensively, he's got a long way to go. And I think that when you look at the tools that he has, his physical tools, he has everything physically to be a good defender. He's 6'9", and I just felt that the defense and the rebounding, it came and went at times. Like it felt like if he really by design was told, hey, when you're out there, grab rebounds and just really focus on that, he could be a good rebounder. But it also felt like at times it just felt unacceptable for him to have one or two rebounds when he could give you 6 to 8 rebounds on any given time if he's really focused in on it. So there's definitely some things he needs to work on next year. And I think that if you really want to continuously carve out your role, you gotta improve defensively. It's gotta be top of the list for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting next year because I think that Obi Toppin earned that spot. He played a lot of backup five over Isaiah Jackson when because Rick Carlisle trusted his ability more. And I think you also like that he could spread the floor more than Isaiah Jackson in the way Jalen was not playing as well, uh, just playing well. But you throw in Jarris Walker into the mix. And I think the question kind of presents itself once again. Can Jarris Walker earn the backup 4 minutes from Obi Toppin? Could he go out there and get them in training camp and in the preseason, given the opportunity? Could he lock down Obi Toppin? And Carlisle's like, man, Jarris Walker's really taking that stride. Like, I think everybody believes Jarris Walker has a higher ceiling than Obi Toppin.
I think so at this point.
Yeah, and especially because of what he can do defensively. Now, they could play a lot together at the 3 and the 4. They could even go small and play 4 or 5 together. That's what I think I like about this Pacers team is they're so dynamic and so versatile. But it is interesting just because I just kind of wonder, like, eventually somebody's going to have to get pushed out of the rotation. And who is that going to be? I don't think Obi Toppin is one of those guys that's like desperately looking to go find a new place to call home. We heard that his agents were, trying to find ways to get Obi to Indianapolis as well. Like it was one of those things where it's like they're calling up Indiana, like, hey, can we get Obi Toppin in Indiana? Like that's big stuff right there, right? That's not just uh, anything to take lightly because it meant Obi Toppin felt like this was the right fit for him. And so after having a career year, having a deep run to the Eastern Conference Final, something that the Knicks still haven't done since 2000, Obi Toppin leaves New York and he goes to Indianapolis and he flies his wings all the way to the Celtics in the NBA Eastern Conference Finals. So he's definitely a contributor for this team, and I think that Indiana will get worse if they do not retain him in free agency. They have desperately needed size at the 4 position. They addressed it by trading him or trading for him with 2 second-round picks, and then also trading for Pascal Siakam. Now, this is probably the most depth they've had at the 4 position that I can probably ever remember. Even when they had David West, there was not a lot of depth behind him. So to me, like, wow. I guess Scola was good, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
it wasn't vintage Scola. It was like,
yeah,
you're getting a little
past
bit.
his prime.
Yeah, exactly. I just think that right now, like you have three guys that have a great argument between Siakam, Obi, and Jarris Walker. Three guys with you know that could probably be starting on teams. You could definitely
Yeah,
put it that way. Like Jarris Walker could definitely be starting on some teams, even if they're more of like a rebuilding type team. But I also feel like
the
if
team that
you,
drafted him.
yeah, I know. I mean, look, here's the thing. If you look at Jarris Walker, you look at Obi Toppin, you kind of kind of see a guy that, I mean, I think they were both 8th overall picks.
Yep.
And you look at a guy that it didn't work out for Obi Toppin in his first spot. They ended up having Julius Randle, who played really, really good to the point where Obi became expendable. I hope that doesn't happen in Indiana, because then you look at, the Pacers bring in Siakam. All of a sudden now Obi gets pushed back, which pushes Jarris back. And now it's a good problem to have for a team. It's not a great problem for the players. So, for Jarris Walker, we'll see what happens. But to your point before, if the Pacers were to lose Obi Toppin, they definitely are taking a hit. They are not a better team for it. And the bench that was the best bench unit in the NBA no longer becomes that type of strength that it was before. And I think that at that point, you look at what the market might be for Obi Toppin. It doesn't look like this is going to be a guy that you're saying, how are we going to be able to afford him? It feels that this is somebody that wants to be in Indiana. If the money is right, it feels like it's a perfect fit. And I also think that he's really beloved by his teammates. There was not one moment last year that we heard any pouting, anything of the sort of Obi being taken from the starting lineup to the bench. Honestly, you never heard anything, period. I think this is a guy that just wants to play basketball and spend time with his family. I mean, that's really what it looked like was important to him, and that's the kind of guy that you want in your locker room.
No, Obi Toppin's a great guy. I mean, when we talked with Chad Buchanan, like they had reviews about Obi Toppin, and when he had success this year, you kind of tell by some of the stuff that Chad Buchanan said with us, what he said directly after the season ended with his exit interview. They want to bring Obi Toppin back. It was pretty clear that that's kind of the goal. I mean, me and you debated what the price should be on one of our mailbag podcasts. So if people did not hear that, I said, I think Facci, you were around like the 13 million was kind of where you thought he should cap out at. But I said if somebody were to give him, 3 for 45 or 4 for 60, would you really, lose a guy that is that important to what your bench is for $6 to $7 million over the next couple of years? I would not do that. But if it got closer to 16, 17, then yeah, now it's starting to add up way too much out of price range for the Pacers. But it's all subject, and I think the Pacers are going to be very smart about this. I think Obi Toppin clearly wants to be here, still hanging around Indiana as we speak, getting on workouts, things like that. His relationship with Tyrese Halliburton is through the roof. But if you just saw how Obi Toppin interacted with this fan base, Facci, on a one-on-one, level type of situation here, where he's pregame asking kids to come on the court and throw him lobs when he's doing his workout pregame with Mike Weiner, and taking time to, take pictures with his daughter and hold her on the court before the game starts and talking with his lady. And then, of course, signing autographs for people as he leaves. Like, he is just a perfect citizen for the state of Indiana. This is the kind of guy that you want representing your team. Doesn't usually get into a lot of scuffles on the court, plays basketball the right way. Yes, you wish he could be better, maybe be a little bit more consistent. But overall, I mean, if you watch Obi Toppin play, you realize I can see why this guy was a national player of the year. This is a guy that really put Dayton on the map. And this is a guy that proved, that he can be special at moments. And, we see a lot of guys like that in college that don't always end up being great pros, right? But I think that Obi Toppin has found the balance of I was a really good college player. I can be a really good role player in the NBA. And I can continue to keep pushing my ceiling higher because what? How old is Obi Toppin at this point?
I want to say he's probably right around. I got it pulled up
24,
right.
26, around that range?
So he's 26 years old. Yep, he
Yeah.
turned 26 in March of this year. So he's pretty freshly 26, which is,
Yeah.
I feel like, an age that you're starting to kind of hit your prime. And I think that, I don't think last season was a fluke. I really
No.
do think that he can get better from here. I think he just needed the reps, and I think that he is physically in the perfect situation for him. That if he goes to another team that plays a lot slower, yes, he can shoot the three, but he's also getting, we saw by the numbers how many open looks he's getting from 3-point line, how many easy baskets he's getting in transition. This is the type of situation that caters to his strengths. And I don't think the grass is always greener for a guy like Obi Toppin that might want to be. I don't think it's worth it to chase, kind of like you said, an extra $2 million or so per year or anything of that sort. I think if you're happy and you're thriving and you have a good role on a team that's winning, I think that Obi got to experience a lot last year. And I think that the combination of winning playing every single night, being a major, part of that bench, I think that should go a long way.
Yeah, we've talked about Obi Toppin a lot now, but I do want you to kind of give me a recap of some of the highlights of his season because I felt like he had some really big moments this year that stood out that we talked about ad nauseum throughout the season. Like, man, remember when Obi Toppin did that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, I think one of the things that really stands out is 27 points against the 76ers in the in-season tournament. I think that was a game. He was coming off of a loss, to Philly just before. How are you going to bounce back? I felt like he was a big part of that bounce back win. I think another performance that you can't forget about is his defense on Jimmy Butler was real. It was real. He played one of the best defensive games I think any of us have ever seen Obi Toppin play. Also, while dropping 20 points, he was a plus 18 in that win against Miami. So I think that those are two performances that really stand out. And then you can't forget about the game-winning layup against Phoenix in an epic comeback. He had 23 points and 11 boards. Those are three performances that really stood out to me. And then when I broke it down a little bit further, because I started just going down a wormhole of Obi Toppin stats, the Pacers were 14-4 when he scored 15 or more. So that just showed, and a lot of nights he kind of was that X factor. And then another one, because I refuse to believe that this man can't be a better rebounder. I know he can be. The Pacers were 7-3 when he pulled down 8 or more rebounds. So I felt like on nights that he really showed up on the glass, the Pacers were just that much better of a team for it. And I think that that's something that it's not to say that he can come back and average 7 or 8 rebounds next year, but I really do think that why can't Obi Toppin average 5 rebounds per game in this league?
You know what's really funny? I was thinking about when you said 7-3 when he has 8 or more rebounds. For some reason, I don't know why, but I remember him having like 10 rebounds against the Memphis Grizzlies in the game that we lost in John Morant's return.
Probably one of the losses, honestly.
Why
You
in the
know,
world do I remember that? That's so
yeah,
random for me to
I'm
remember that
pretty
one.
sure. I'm pretty sure he did have a strong rebounding game, but I do know for a fact that that was definitely a loss. And I remember going through and being like, yeah, I guess it was. So he probably did have 10 boards in that game, but it's just 7-3, man. You can't argue with 7-3.
No, I mean, you would love to see that number be a little bit higher, like more of like a larger sample size of games where he had more than 8 rebounds or more, right? You don't want to just see just 10 games out of 82 where he only had 8 rebounds or more, but the minutes probably weren't all the way there too because even when he was starting, I will say this, Rick Carlisle closed a lot of games with Obi on the bench and Aaron Nesmith at the 4.
Yeah. Hmm.
So it was like Aaron, Buddy, Bruce, Miles, Tyrese, or so Buddy and Aaron were always out there. You might every once in a while have Benedict out there over Buddy. Maybe at some points you would have Andrew out there, but I think Andrew was hurt really a lot early on, so it wasn't really like we saw a lot of him. But regardless, I will say they didn't close a lot with Obi Toppin because they didn't trust Obi Toppin as a closer. I think he made strides defensively, but still, you go back to that Phoenix game, he had to close, and they did a lot of great stuff there with him and Pascal at the 4 and the 5, and it just kind of opened up this new can of worms when Pascal got traded. And I just think Obi Toppin's a really good fit, and defensively, he's got to get better. Maybe we could see him develop being better at guarding fives moving forward, maybe guarding in space a little bit more if he's going to be asked to do more of that kind of thing, play small ball five, guard in space against guards, even if it's just like a Drew Holiday, Derek White type of player, which we saw against Boston, like you got to be able to not let those guys take you off the dribble, and you got to use your size to your advantage. But other than that, I don't have a whole lot on Obi Toppin left to say. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I just think that now I think everybody has a little bit of a clear understanding. A good role player in this league, good role players sometimes are the difference in series in the playoffs. And I think that Obi was someone that more than anyone you were able to count on this year
Yeah,
for the amount of games that he was able to play. I think that he was pretty consistent, especially towards the end. I think he really caught fire towards the end of the season, and that's really where the Pacers were. Every game kind of felt do or die. I mean, there was a lot of games towards the back end where if the Pacers lost, they could be looking at the play-in. And I feel like he's someone who really played some of his best basketball towards the end. You never had one moment where it was like, Obi's not happy. I don't know. He's complaining. This you never heard anything other than just that. Hey, this guy's well liked. He's playing hard, and I think for that, that's what you want when you're trying to build a winning culture. And I think that this is someone that now I've seen enough to say, hey, I would love to bring him back. If the number's right, absolutely make it happen. But it's not someone like with like Jalen Smith where you're like, oh, well, we're not going to be able to afford him unless he takes this discount. It's no, the Pacers can afford him. They can bring him back. And I think that it does make a lot of sense for them to bring him back.
Absolutely, Pacha. There's a lot of reasons why it makes sense to bring him back. You laid them all out. One other thing that I'm going to bring up is the contract will be very tradable if you do bring him back, and you need bigger salaries that are in that middle range there to combine together and make a bigger trade if you want to do that. Not saying the Pacers should do that, just saying if they want to do that, it does give them a little bit more flexibility. I've said that a lot, so I won't keep rehashing that point, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize if you're getting tired of hearing me say that, but if they do that trade, you can say, I remember when Alex said they were going to do that. And I say, yeah, that's why I kept saying it, because you don't want to really trade Miles, but you don't really want to trade Aaron either. Like you have a good problem on your hands, but it's still a problem. So that's where we're at right now, Foch.
What I will say this is anything can happen because I remember you always got to go back to the Bruce Brown scenario when it sounded crazy to say, but the Pacers could trade him. It's like, why would the Pacers trade him? They just signed him. It was the situation all along. They had a master plan. So at this point, don't get too spooked out about any number. I think, yeah, if you do see Obi Toppin get $20 million a year, okay, maybe you could be a little bit freaked out. But I think at this point, if the Pacers are to bring him back for anything below $15 million or so, everything's going to be more than fine. It's not something that's going to say, how are we ever going to move this contract? Everything will work out. And I think that this is someone that can still get better.
Absolutely, Pacha. We're going to wrap things up here on this Friday, June 14th. Hope you all are enjoying this episode of Setting the Pace. If you do, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcast. And I will say this, tomorrow is my mom's birthday. So happy birthday, Mom, in advance. I know you're probably not listening to this, but if you happen to catch this and you listened all the way to the end, happy birthday to you. We're going to be going to celebrate on Saturday night. And then, of course, Sunday, Father's Day. So to all of our fathers out there, Father Facci here, want to wish everybody a happy Father's Day as well. But Facci, go ahead and let everybody know where they can find us at on social media.
Absolutely. So you can find us on Twitter at PacersPod STP. You can find Alex on Twitter at AlexGoldenNBA. I can be found on Twitter at _FACCI. You can find us on Instagram at PacersPodSTP. You can find us on Facebook at Setting the Pace. You can find us on TikTok at Setting the Pace. And Alex, tell them where they can check us out on YouTube.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to youtube.com/setting the pace, a Pacers podcast, where you can find all of our video content. Like I said, subscribe, leave a comment in the comment section below, and let us know what you're thinking. And we are excited to continue to add our content on there. And hopefully by the start of next season, the video content will be a little bit more produced and not just a Zoom video thrown up there as I'm falling asleep the night before with a thumbnail that I have thrown together. So appreciate everybody for tuning in so much. But Facci, if you're excited for the weekend and excited to be back on Monday, then hit me with those 3 words.
Let's go, Pacers.